Hi, and welcome to Daily Chess. This time I will present you the second round game between Nakamura and Kamsky in the Sinquefield Cup, St. Louis 2013. Kamsky was probably still suffering from his loss against Carlsen and wanted to strike back, but I think that's the reason why he chose to play Sicilian against Nakamura. Despite being a Sicilian player himself, I mean, almost all the players play Sicilian from time to time. He's usually known as a very good Lopez player because he likes to have a solid base, a solid foundation, and first then with chances to get a counterplay or to try to seize the initiative. That's usually a style. And it's surprising that he go for Sicilian immediately. He's probably tried to get decent chances to play for the full point from the very beginning. So that's not just his idea here. Knight f3, e6. Okay, so not going for any d6 Sicilians. So neither variation, classical variation, or dragon maybe even, and not going even for at least not for the time being, for any Sveshnikov lines or something like this. So e6 might lead to a time on variation, and d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, so the typical open Spanish, and a6, just a waiting move here. Black is making pawn moves, which, okay, of course, gives him certain, he falls back in development, but he's trying to stop the white pieces from getting any access to important squares. I mean, he cannot use it in that way. There isn't any way white can use this lead in development right now, and that's what his pawn moves are for. I mean, he's controlling f5, where the knight could go. He's controlling b5, which is also a very important square, because often when black lacks in development, a knight maneuver b5 and d6 proves to be advantageous for white. And with this system here, it simply tries to stop any counterplay before finally starting to build up on play against, for example, the e4 pawn. Then knight can be developed. One advantage of the e6 system is that the bishop can go to c5, immediately pressuring this knight once the knight goes to c6. So you can get speedy development, and of course b4 is also a nice square for the bishop. And usually black hopes that his pawn structure supports a quick development later on, without avoiding any weaknesses and any immediate death by a white assault. So knight c3, typical development. It's not yet clear where this bishop belongs to. I mean, on c4 it can always be hit, and bishop e2 might probably be best, but sometimes the bishop might also go to d3. Okay, b5. Well, rather, I think it's not the main move here. The main move here is probably queen c7 and knight c6, but which are played by far the most. But b5, aims for quick quick counterplay. I mean, the bishop can now go to b7, already putting pressure on this pawn here. And sometimes with typical Sicilian idea, which is in a way risky because you neglect your development, to play b5, b4. With b5, b4, you distract the defender of the e4 pawn, and once this knight goes, the e4 pawn is hanging. So that's one idea, one typical motive behind something like this. So bishop d3, okay, protects the pawn in advance. Bishop b7, already eyeing the pawn. Cancel. Knight c6. Well, the knight is, of course, attacked, and I'm not sure if something like this happens, knight b3, for example, bishop b4 might come, and maybe even knight b4 and attacking the bishop here. So I don't think this knight is very useful there, at least for the time being. I mean, this is c5 square, well, is controlled by the bishop. After d6, it's not accessible anymore. I mean, a5 can still be played, under certain circumstances, and then b4 comes, a4 comes, and I'm not sure if the knight is so well placed there. So therefore, white usually either takes the knight on c6 or plays bishop e3 here to protect the pawn, the knight. Sorry. So knight takes c6 happened, and after bishop takes c6, it's maybe interesting to know for you that both players already had this position in their games. When I checked the database, I see a game between Gashimov and Nakamura in 2012, which was the 74th Tata Steel Tournament, the A group, and Kamsky had it against Felger in 2010 in Khanty-Mansiysk, which he in the Olympiad, which he managed to win. So it's already quite interesting that both players had experience on this line, and despite knowing that, still went for it. Okay, in the game between Felger and Kamsky, the game continued with Queen e2, which seemed not best, and after something like Bishop c5, I mean, the idea is quite interesting to play Bishop d4, e5, Bishop d4, because if he neglects e5, if he don't goes for it, he can either push his put his bishop still on d4 and try to damage the structure here, after which the double pawns on an open file will be a serious weakness. And if knight goes after an exchange, knight f6 might come, which is also quite interesting, because he already puts a certain pressure on this pawn and supports a d5 break, after which black would be at least equal. So white always has to consider the counterplay, the possible counterplay for black, which would allow him to equalize the game, and yeah, try to push his own play. I mean, the bishop on c5 is annoying, because what white usually tries in Sicilian is to play f2, f4, and gaining space, and after this either e4, e5, or f4, f5, trying to break up the position, or maybe even advance to f6, trying to create a weakness here and a bind. And this is usually something where with a method which with white launches his attack, his typical attack at the Sicilian. So in the game for e5, and after bishop d4 he got very good counterplay. For example, rook d1, queen b6, and you know, some spots are always weak here. I mean, this knight can maybe even go something like knight d5 or knight f5, or sometimes even knight g6 to put pressure on this new created weakness. And as long as the king remains on g1, the pawn cannot move and support his comrade on e5. So this was the game which Kamsky had on the board, and well, certainly Nakamura analyzed this position a bit. I mean, he already had the position also on the board against Gashimov, and the game went after rook e1, queen b8, a4 is the new move. Sorry, queen e2 here was played then, and after bishop d6, e5 again, this typical thrust, bishop c7. Yeah, was already certainly the end of the game of Gashimov Nakamura. I mean, it's certainly a bit early to speak of an end, but I mean, black still has some certain play here. I mean, okay, this pawn is of course a bit annoying. I mean, once this knight moves here into king castles, there are almost no defenders on the king side, so you always have to be careful about certain attacks going on, or maybe even sacrifice sometimes. You know, followed by a rook lift, something like to h3, and if the king castled, he simply lacks defenders, and that's something that white could try to use. But in a certain way, if black stays flexible, it shouldn't be too much. But Nakamura deviated here from his game, and instead of going for Gashimov's line, he went for a4 immediately. It's quite interesting, of course. Certainly, if white is allowed to take here, he will create a weakness, which he can always attack. And trading one pair of rooks, especially the a rook, is probably in white's favor, because that's the a8 rook is usually a rook which black likes to have for his counterplay. I mean, white is usually playing on the king side, black is usually playing on the queen side. So if white manages to create a weakness on the queen side and exchange one of the main attackers and main attacking pieces from black, he will usually be a bit better because black simply lacks the typical play he's familiar with in the Sicilian. Okay, b4. Therefore, he doesn't take himself, or he doesn't allow to take. The knight has to go. And what you can see on the board is a typical knight sacrifice in the Sicilian. I mean, it's obviously that this knight cannot be taken, at least not immediately, because the rook on e1 is getting very, very powerful. I mean, after this, it's difficult. It's just difficult here. I mean, yeah, it's already difficult to say what black should do. I mean, okay, if he goes there, this king will be permanently weak. I mean, after this, we might already open up some lines, and the game is just over, I guess. If instead something like bishop e7, for example, with the idea of playing knight f6, he could try some tricks. Maybe first of all, I could of course take here, but maybe even something like bishop g5 is an idea. I mean, if something like this, then probably queen h5, first taking, and later on something like queen h5 probably just kills black, because after this, bishop can take. If he takes, the rook falls, the knight is hanging, the bishop is pinned, and the game is just lost. So that's maybe one idea. So that's why the knight cannot obviously cannot be taken, because it just simply opens up lines. And I mean, okay, the knight is pretty active there, and certainly it stops knight f6, because after knight f6 you could just take it out, and this weakness here might be a bit annoying. Let's put it that way. I mean, queen h5 might come, and it's not certainly clear. I mean, entirely. Bishop h6 might come, after which the queen penetrates here. Some weakened squares are there. The king is still a bit unsafe here. I mean, f5, f4, f5 might come, weaken some squares, or maybe even e5. And the king might feel a bit uncomfortable. So knight d5. Bishop d6 was Kamsky's choice, how to defend it here. Well, the main plan probably is just to play knight e7 here. Queen h5, okay. Knight e7. Well, white cannot really get anything by delaying this this exchange. Probably should just take here. Bishop takes, and b3. b3 with the aim of putting pressure on this long diagonal here. And if black decides to go for e5, sorry, for bishop f6, then maybe e5 might come here. And if he retreats, he already achieved something. I mean, he certainly fixed some pawns, because, okay, this one's still pinned, but certainly he fixed some pawns and got some space here. And I'm not quite sure. I mean, after something like queen g4, he already puts pressure on some pawns, and if he castles, then bishop h6 is probably just winning. So let's say, for example, queen g4, if he castles, then this typical idea. And otherwise, if g6, then I guess just bishop h6, and yeah, I mean, okay, the king is in the center. Next, probably something like bishop e4 to try to exchange off this bishop here, after which he can go for some light squares and maybe even put pressure here on the f7 pawn. And yeah, I think white should be better here. Yeah, should be better, I guess. But now it's an interesting choice. Kamsky played this move, I mean, quite quickly, and I'm not sure why he aimed for a5. I mean, he doesn't plan to exchange off this bishop here. So, I mean, white is not really threatening to play a5, because this pawn might become weak here. especially, I don't know, if f5 happens, maybe even bishop b5 is an idea. If he exchanges it off and accepts his double pawns, then the a5 pawn becomes weak. Might be an idea. I mean, I'm simply not sure if this was really necessary. I mean, he still has this king here in the center, so maybe canceling was an idea. After bishop b4, f6, I mean, it looks dangerous to weaken here some squares, or to be forced to weaken some squares. And but in general, I would say it doesn't look too bad. I mean, for example, I mean, how does White want to exploit this? If f5, f4, the pawn is just hanging. Otherwise, if he supports it, it's a bit slow, and d5 might come. I don't really see a way how he could really exploit this, at least for the time being. I mean, not maybe maybe something like bishop c4 to try to use this square here somehow, but I mean, even if he tries to use this weakened light squares here, I mean, after e5 and f5, I don't really see a way he can really benefit from it. I mean, maybe even this g6 comes, king h8, or let's say rook f7, bishop f8, maybe even bishop g7, stuff like this. This pawn is always a weakness. If f4, then maybe even d6 might come and try to weaken this structure here a bit. So, for example, I mean, if f4 right now, let's say he plays even g6, I probably could even do without it. Let's maybe immediately start the counterplay, yeah? Because after this, let's maybe put it first to cover some dark squares. Queen h6, for example, with the idea that after this, we already threaten mate. So probably maybe rook e8. I guess the rook is pretty good here, because if we play d6, the pawn might be a bit weak. We have to support a d5 push. So next with bishop f8, maybe bishop g7, and then d6. I think black is maybe surviving here. Okay, but a5, I don't really see the point in this move. Okay, let's go next. Bishop e2. Okay, g7 is attacked, and castling would be probably a bit risky here. So bishop f6 takes, and well, black has a weakened structure here, a weakened pawn structure, and it's a structure which typically arises in the classical Sicilian. It's doubled f pawns, but I'm not sure if this position really favors white, because I think it's a black, because it's quite a good version for white here. And after e5, it simply underlines some weakened dark squares here, and white's activity here might prove a bit decisive. I mean, if this pawn goes, the h7 pawn might hang, and then queen h6, queen g7 secures the bishop and the pawn, and it's just very difficult for black to play here. I mean, he doesn't have any obvious counterplay. I mean, his pieces are not connected, and without this, he's just defending. He's just defending passively. What happened also in the game here. I mean, after rook g8, okay, trying to generate some play against g2, but that's just a one move threat. And after g3, even rook g5 is not really serious. Queen h6 idea. Pawn takes f6 maybe even, or probably just queen takes f6, attacking the rook. Rook takes e5, queen takes f6, the rook is hanging, an important rook h5. Without this, I mean, this is probably the only move. Taking here is not very good, because black always has this weakness here on h7, and if this pawn falls, then the bishop goes to g8 and threatening the f7 pawn. So for example, after this, yeah, even if he plays, okay, d5 is maybe a bit stupid here, it just blocks the bishop here. It's already difficult to give any advance for black here. I mean, even if he tries to exchange the queens here, probably just check, king has to go there, the pawn is 1. After the next move, maybe queen h4, and you could then just simply try to exchange off the queens, because potentially, I mean, those 2 pawns here are very dangerous, especially in an ending. I mean, black cannot go anywhere with this pawns. The c2 pawn isn't really a weakness. Okay, any push here with the d or f pawn in a way limits the bishop here on c6, so this position would be hopeless. Okay, rook h5 is an important idea and quite an interesting one. Bishop e4. He realizes that the only play black can have is to try to sacrifice sometimes something against this in near future maybe. But with the exchange of bishops, the king is just safe. And after queen d8, queen f3. Very strong. I mean, the queen is certainly very passive there, and exchanging queens would help him because black is the one under pressure. Rook c5. Okay, in case to avoid the double pawns. Queen e3. First of all, I thought, why not this? I mean, bishop takes c6 is maybe a bit more logical, especially since after rook takes c6, rook e4 is already serious because black has problems defending the h7 pawn. After this, this lineup here, king and queen, is very serious. So I was wondering why he didn't play this. I mean, bishop takes c6 because he has to go for d takes c6, and I mean, it's quite clear that he has numerous weaknesses now. And after the d7 pawn goes, this structure here already becomes a bit shaky. I mean, this pawn is pinned, which means that f5 square is also available. Later on, we'll have to collect some motives, some ideas, And also the d line opens up. I mean, the rook comes quickly. He can maybe even play rook d2, rook e to d1, and double up. And by all means, I don't really see any counterplay for black here. He's just surviving, and it's just so obvious that only pressing here is white that I didn't see the logical reason why white didn't go for it. I mean, after rook a to d1, queen g5, for example, and I don't know, maybe rook e2 is now not possible. Maybe rook e2, rook e to d1, or maybe even immediately rook d6 here. I mean, he's just putting pressure on the pawn, so even doubling up with tempi, and taking here is just suicidal. We just take, and well, if he takes, we just check on c6 and win the rook. If it's really difficult to suggest anything. I mean, even queen d2 doesn't help. I mean, we'll just take here. If he takes with check, we just go there. The rook is hanging. Rook c7 comes. The pawn is weak. If he moves, h7 falls. Probably is just too much. I mean, maybe even first rook d1. The queen goes. We take the rook. The rook is protected. This rook is attacked, winning. Yeah. But by all means, it was just better. I mean, but okay, queen e3. And the problem is now that he gets the chance to simplify a bit. And when you're defending, one idea is to simplify the position, because you can then get rid of the pressure, and that's what Kamsky could have gone for. For example, rook e5, putting a pin, and after queen d4, just a massive exchange here. Take, and maybe h6, with the idea that when the queen tries, because she's the only piece who can pressure the h6 pawn right now, if he tries to put pressure on it, queen g5 defense or queen f6, and then d5, and suddenly, after the light square bishop exchange, the c2 pawn is a bit weak. Now black structure comes black simply gets some benefit from putting a structure with a4 and b4, because he now simply has the c2 weakness available, which he can pressure, and this is something that guarantees him some counterplay. Okay, after queen e7, I don't know if he was already in time trouble. I didn't follow the game too closely, I must admit. But if he was in time trouble, it's quite interesting why he didn't play. Maybe he was still dreaming of a win here. I'm not sure, but I mean it's obvious that White's the one who presses the game. Bishop takes h7. According to Ramirez, it's even the only way to fight for an advantage. I mean, of course it's a bit risky because f5 is a common idea here for black, after which the bishop is trapped. He has to go to g6, h4, and maybe f3 in order to get out. So f5, bishop g6 with check, king d8. The king is probably safer somewhere here, because then the rook can simply go, and the king can maybe even protect some weaknesses here. Okay, to c1. I guess, I mean, first of all, of course, it defends the c2 pawn, but as it becomes, in some lines, it's quite clear that this break here might be a bit dangerous for black. Because, I mean, okay, of course, if we go to c3, he can take, and the b3 pawn is weak. But more important is to open up lines. I mean, the king is healing for the queen side, so we should try to pressure him there. I mean, we have two active rooks. His rook on a8 is doing nothing, so it's quite logical to play there. So yeah, king c7, bishop h5. I'll try to secure the bishop first. e5. Queen d6 is another idea, but after rook cd1, you can play f4, which is also quite strong because it simply weakens the structure here. Because I mean, if he takes here, we take the queen. And if the rook is attacked, so he has to go, and after which he can take, and suddenly the rook comes into play, and it's getting quite serious here for him. For example, I mean, you can probably just best first introduce the rook here. If he goes back, it's already quite serious. I mean, after this, it's it's obviously very complicated here, but I mean, stuff like this is threatening, and suddenly white is in danger. So f4 is a pretty important resource here. So maybe he would, yeah, this would be serious. Okay, e5. I mean, he's trying to get his central majority running, but I mean, he's so well placed. White's so well placed here that he shouldn't be able. f4, queen d6, and well, seemingly both players were down to only about 4 minutes here, and black is doing quite well now. I mean, he has made some improvements finally, and he tries to get some counterplay. It's getting quite a bit serious. Of course, he's also threatening to take here on f4 and to weaken the structure, after which a rook on g8 comes to the play, and yeah, the bishop is also very strong here on eyeing the g2 pawn square. So suddenly black gets some play here. Okay, rook f1, trying to in case of taking, to take with the queen and to secure at least a healthy structure. Bishop e4, also very strong. So suddenly those weaknesses here, I mean, the absence of this bishop here, which was some kind of a glue for the pawn here, suddenly you start to feel it, that this bishop is simply missing there. Queen f2, rook c3, preventing an advance of this pawn here. Bishop e2, king b7 is maybe a bit, well, maybe not ideal. Rook c to d1, rook e6, and bishop c4. And that's the reason, because the rook is suddenly trapped here, trapped outside. I mean, he cannot really get anywhere now. Okay, can go to f3, but even there, I mean, the queen later on come to c5 and giving some annoying checks. d5, queen c5, strong. With the idea that after d takes c4, rook d6 kills immediately. The king cannot survive. So rook d8, queen takes a5. Very, very strong. I mean, he is a double pin, and he cannot really do anything about it. I mean, okay, you can try to take the rook on c2, but it's probably just lost now. I mean, queen b6 check, queen takes b6, king takes b6, bishop d3, king c5 is maybe a bit more difficult for white, because black's quite active here. I mean, once this bishop goes, those lights could be weaknesses here become serious. But rook c2, okay, well, probably is just losing here. Rook f2, very strong. Rook takes f2, and now strong. Queen takes f2, queen takes d8, sorry. Keeping the initiative. The rook is still attacked. Okay, you can go, of course, give a check here, which he does. Now important not go for king h1, but king f1, rook b2. One idea might be to play f4 and introduce the queen. Taking on h2 is not better, because if the bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, takes, yeah, I don't see a way this pawn can be defended, because rook b2 is not in time. Check, and the pawn falls. And the rook b2 takes, not just exchanging everything off. The position is just lost. I mean, okay, he can win this pawn, but white will win maybe this pawn here, the a5 pawn, and for example, let's just go down this line here. And now if he tries to get this pawn, he's already busted. Taking, and with check, this pawn will fall. So if he tries to go something with this, just play rook b5, king g2, h3, g4, and so on. Winning easily. Yeah, it's quite an exciting game, I would say. I mean, certainly we could see both players probably in time trouble, collapsing a bit. I mean, Nakamura got a very pleasant edge out of the opening, in my opinion, and crumbled a bit later on. I mean, it was obvious that Kamsky was a bit pressing. I mean, he tried to win the game, to equal the score, but the risk he took were a bit too much, and at least at the beginning. And later on with time trouble, no, obviously Nakamura had to calculate a lot. He simply got into trouble, allowed counterplay, and was even on the verge of losing the game. And it's quite an interesting struggle, a psychological struggle here. And I'm looking forward how Carsten did in his game here in the second round. Of course, you will find the clip on my YouTube channel, so stay tuned. Bye bye.